AI is an opportunity, and it's a tool that, if used properly, can enhance the process. If I've asked AI to write the song for me, and if I've asked AI to sing the song for me, then what has it cost me?
You collaborated with Janet Manyowa on a song called Amazing God.
We had no idea how the song was going to do. And before we knew it, the song became big on Gospel Greats. When you see people doing well, and you know that God used you in a small part to help them start or to help them get where you are, I think that in itself is satisfying. So the Janet story, that people may not know, Manyowa calls me asking for mentorship for his wife. Was music ever seen as a career path? Sounding answer is probably not really, right?
Now, you may agree with me that it's more or less a career.
The Zimbabwean culture is somebody wants to be the writer, they want to be the singer, and it's very rare that you have somebody who can do both things well. Be humble about where you are. Part of it also is humility to know exactly how gifted or not gifted you are.
Meaningful carriers now. Take the time to take your destiny in your hands now. With meaningful carriers.
Welcome, Doc, to part 3 of our conversations. It's been a pleasure having you, and I've learned quite a lot from you.
Thanks for having me. I'm always looking forward to doing these. I don't even know what I'm going to do when we get to the end of the episode.
No, you're most welcome for another one, but let's see how far we get with today's conversation. For anybody that's been watching, they've followed us from the first part where we talked about your career journey, then all the way to the US, and we spoke about the challenges that you faced. And now we want to talk about the music part of your career, to try and get to understand this from a very musical, but also from a very career perspective. Mm-hmm. So you hold a doctorate from Texas A&M University. You are a GIS Scientist, but at the same time, you're a recording artist. If somebody comes across you, how do you explain who you are to them?
So the funny thing is, that's one of the questions that I don't like answering. So whenever somebody says, what do you do? I always find it, I don't know why I always find it very hard, very hard to answer, because the first thing that comes to mind, right, when somebody asks that question is work, right? What did you do for your career? And I always feel like answering that question really limits the exposure that I can give somebody into who I am, So it's always a tough question. However, whenever somebody asks that question, right, say, hey, so Doc, what do you do, right? I think I never really talk about the music, I always talk about the day job, hey, I'm a scientist, or, I'm a researcher, or I'm, I work for a consultancy firm, and this is what I do on a daily basis. But I always feel like it never really answers the important question, as in, who are you, and so the who are you part, which really leads into the what do you do, so who am I? Obviously I'm a worshiper, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a friend, I'm a mentor, and I'm a creative. Right. So that last part of me being a creative is what leads directly now into what do I do, so maybe on a daily basis, to earn a living. Because when people ask that question, usually that's kind of what they mean, right? What do you do? What's your job like? What's your career like? So I'm, in terms of career, I look at myself as a scientist, as a curious, creative, I think, and as a researcher a little bit, and then the music is not really what do I do. The music is really who I am, I think. Again, it's all part of that creative nature of who I feel I am. It's a long answer. You will find what you're looking for somewhere in there.
Of course. No, thank you, Doc. That's a very detailed explanation. I'll definitely find something in there.
Yeah.
And without a doubt.
Yeah.
So you are a recording artist, and you also run an academy training kind of worship artist.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up in Zimbabwe, was music ever seen as a real career path from your perspective? and rather, when did you know it was going to be a serious part of your life's work?
I'll answer the second part of your question first. As in when did I see this as something that's a big part of who I am, or my life? I think I've always felt that music was a big part of who I am, just because it came natural. It really just came natural. I'll give you an example of where I started with the whole music thing. I think that also helps to explain why it is a big part of who I am, even from an early age. So I grew up in Chitungwiza, and also in Gweru, right? When I grew up in Chitungwiza, I went to a school called Chinembiri, or Segetu Primary School. And I used to play the marimba, that little xylophone. So I was playing the marimba and was in a marimba band from age 7. So when I was in first grade, second grade, I was already playing the marimba, and that also came just natural. I cannot really say that it was hard to learn how to play. It was, no, it just came. It's just a gift that God gave. So I played that all through my primary school, being part of a band, being captain of a band, and we were actually composing songs, and we didn't call it that, we didn't have a word for that, but coming up with songs and then teaching the group and then playing as a band, so I did that. When I was in Chitungwiza, I did that when I was in Gweru as well, in primary school, just playing the marimba, teaching others to play, and coordinating a band where we'd play together, come up with these little songs that actually made sense. And so that was part of my primary education. The marimba was a big part of it. And then as I went to boarding school, I couldn't play the marimba there, but going to church, I started teaching myself to play the piano. So I did that through secondary school, and then through high school, so secondary school at Sandringham High School, mission school or boarding school, and then A level at Ellis Robbins Boys High. And then at Ellis Robbins, that's when I really started playing the piano, in Scripture Union, and also leading worship, and again, we didn't really call it that at the time, because it just came natural. I don't think that I could say I put a lot of effort. So and that, all the way, from 7 or 6, all the way up to, secondary education, advanced level, and then university. I just did music, it was just a big part of me. And again, no, not so much effort, because it's just a gift that God gave. And I understood clearly that this was going to be a big part of who I am as a person, right? So that's the second part of your question. The first part was, was music ever seen as a career path, during those days? And I think the resounding answer is probably not really, right? Because I think at that time, doing the music thing was usually seen as one of those things that you did if maybe your grades were not really that great in school. You didn't pursue the academic route. And I think at that time also there was this stigma and stereotypic approach towards musicians, to say, hey, you would not amount to anything. So parents, the elders in the society, I think for the most part they discouraged kids from pursuing music as a career path, as a career. Of course, there are exceptions, right? I know that for a fact there are parents also that encourage their kids whenever they realize that they had a gift for it, they'll encourage them to pursue it. But I think the majority of parents during the time that I grew up, music was never really seen seriously. And also, I have to say, even for myself, I never really thought that I would do music as a career, because I was fortunate enough to where academically I was quite strong, so music was never really in question for me. It was never really like at play, to say, after I'm done, I want to be, a musician. I never really thought like that. It never occurred to me that I could pursue music as a career. Why? Because my sights were on, when I'm done, I really want to go to university, have a degree, become a professional, so I think in a nutshell, that's what I can say. Music, the time we're growing up, was never really seen as a serious career path. And for me, I think early on, I realized that I'm just gifted musically. So I knew it was going to be a big part of my life.
I think as a reflection from what you're saying, back then it wasn't probably seen much as a career path, but I think now you may agree with me that it's more or less a career for many people, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I think what has happened also over the years is because of technology, musicians have access to different ways of creating and exposing their art, right? Way back then, I actually remember when we did our very first recording a long time ago, right, about 30 years ago.
Wow.
So when we did our very first recording, it was during that time where you couldn't just walk up to a recording studio. I think we had like 4 or 3 major recording studios in Zimbabwe, or record labels, that's what they were called. They would have the studio on site, and then there would also be the label that would publish the music, create the copies and sell and do all the marketing. So these were like real record labels. So I think there were only 3 or 4 record labels at that time, and you could not just walk up to a record label or recording studio to say, hey, I have an album I want to record. You actually had to create a demo tape, and they would listen. There would be a panel that would listen to the music, and then they would vote on whether it made sense to even bring you to the studio. And I know that before that, so I think our time was even a little bit easier, because before that, you actually had to audition, so I think they would even do live auditions at the studio, and they were so brutally honest, so they'll just tell you, no, we're not doing this. So it was tougher, during those years, it was tougher. And so because of that, I think you only had a very small number, or a very small pool of musicians that ended up being able to actually record a record, put a record down and make that something that would give them revenue. Now, the big difference now is because of the proliferation of like home studios, people are just recording stuff even in their own bedrooms, right? And then now there is no gatekeeper. You record something right now, you can actually post it on iTunes or Spotify or whatever the case may be, Google Play. Right now, the accessibility has become easy for a lot of creatives. And those that have managed to capitalize on that have really been able now to make it a career. They're making it a career because they pretty much have their music career, so to speak, in their own hands, right? They're not relying on some record label somewhere. They're not relying on somebody to say, this is good, so let's record, or this is bad, you cannot record. They're not relying on somebody to say, hey, I can put your stuff on iTunes or Apple or Spotify. They can do it themselves, So for those that have been able to capitalize on this opportunity, it has actually become, a good career path for a lot of, especially younger people that are coming up now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the accessibility side of things has made it quite easy for people to venture into the career from a musical perspective, isn't it? Okay. So let's get to you now. I know you are kind of a man of many talents. You are into different parts and different spaces. Mm-hmm. You have openly said you are not in music for money. Mm-hmm. So my question then is, so what is music to you? And why do you keep kind of showing up for it year after year if it's not anything to pay you at all?
If you have a passion, I would actually maybe even offer a definition. We can actually create our own definition today of what passion is, right? I really believe that a passion, is something that you will do whether somebody pays you or whether somebody doesn't pay you. You're willing to do it. You love to do it. Nothing will stop you. Actually, I would even go further to say a passion is something that you are willing to do, even if financially it may lead to a loss.
Right.
So because of that, I think, and I'm talking passion because this is something that's easy for somebody to understand. But I would even go deeper, to say I really believe it's my calling. I really believe it's my purpose. Right. This is why I'm here. Really, this is really why I'm here, to create music. In this, we're talking about music, to create music that has a message that can either encourage somebody, uplift somebody, or cause somebody to receive restoration, to receive healing, to receive freedom. I really believe that at the end of the day, that's the bigger picture for me. So I'll always, you always see me showing up. When it comes to music, when it comes to writing music, when it comes to teaching others to write, when it comes to recording music, and when it comes to publishing music, even if it does not give me anything financially.
That's powerful, and that's loaded, I would say.
Yeah.
So Yes, I hear you. There is the passion side of things. There is the big picture in terms of the wider impact that it has for you.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't pay the bills from your perspective, what does it then cost you?
This is a question that my wife should respond to, right? So let me just put it like this, right? The process itself of creating music, especially if you're trying to create something that has the quality that can outlive you, is not cheap, right? Because now you're talking about production. To get a good producer, it's not cheap, because those guys also, this is their career as well, right? Which means they need to get paid. So to get somebody that is good enough to where they can interpret what you're hearing, what you're thinking, that process is not cheap. So that's the first step. The second step is, once the music has been produced and recorded, the process of marketing it, putting it out there so that people can have access and get the music. That in itself is actually not cheap, especially if you want to do it the right way. So the right way means you have put in place infrastructure to publicize. You have put in place infrastructure to market. You have put in place things like making music videos so that there are visuals that people can see, say maybe on YouTube. Marketing, to advertise the music basically so that people can get it. All that ecosystem that's involved is not a cheap, it's not a cheap system to put in place. So much that I think it hinders a lot of creatives, a lot of musicians, right? If you want to do it right. However, there are also people that, they just do one song out there and it blows up. And then from that one song that blows up, then they manage to build the structures to support, to support the gift, or to support the music, to support the production. So how much does it cost? It costs a lot. And I'm just talking money, right? Right now I'm just talking about money. I'm not even talking about the time that maybe it takes away from being with family, or the opportunity. There's a lot of cost maybe that's involved that you cannot even put it in money terms. So it's not cheap to make music. Basically, I think that's the short answer.
I'm glad you mentioned that I should ask your wife about what it costs you. So I'm assuming that your wife at some point has ever questioned you to say, so why do you keep on investing in music if it costs you this much without any financial return? I'm curious to know, how did you handle such a conversation?
So that question, that's a good question. But however, what I would actually say is not just my wife. I've also asked myself that question, right? So before the wife asks, to say, hey, but man, do you realize that this production has cost a lot? I've asked that question myself several times. You'll be surprised to hear this. There are several times that I've said, Lord, I don't know, God, I don't know. However, what I would also want to say, pardon, is that question about the costs and the benefits, right? So benefit in this case, let's just say the revenue that comes out of the music when you're comparing with the costs. I'm not at that point where I can say what comes out of the music can 100% sponsor what happens in the music, right? However, times when I have questioned myself, or times when that question has been recurring, right? To say, why do I keep doing this? The answer is actually twofold. The first answer is what I've seen God do through the music. This is through testimonies. Somebody saying, hey, Doc, my mother just passed away, and what got our family through this period is that song that you wrote that says da 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 da, and then they tell you the song and they say, this is the song that we've been listening to the whole, this whole season that we've been walking through. It's your music that has managed to get us through. So that's the first thing. Testimonies of, I've been so discouraged. This is what has been happening. But when I listen to this song, it actually manages to get me through, whatever dark or whatever darkness is going through, whatever dark night I'm experiencing. So these are testimonies that you get from people that make you realize that there is more to it, there is more to it than just what it costs to produce the music. So that's the first. The second thing is, I was talking to one of my mentors, several years ago about the same thing, this exact same thing. I was like, man, I'm doing a concert, I'm doing this and this and this and this, and these concerts really, I make them free because I don't want anybody to not be able to attend because they didn't have the money to do it. But when I look at it, I'm putting in so much in terms of the financial commitment that I'm making. And there are times that I question, to say, Lord, does this still make sense? And my mentor said to me at that time, Comfort, do you realize that there is a cost, to preaching the gospel? Do you realize that there's a cost to making sure that the message is heard? What if this is your contribution to the cost of what it takes, to get somebody saved? So once he said that, it really caused me to look at it, to look at what I do when it comes to the music from a different perspective, to say that there is a cost really to what we do. There is a cost to the gospel. Yes, some people want to say, oh, the gospel is free. Yes, it's free to you who's listening in the moment. But to get it to you is not necessarily free, And so maybe my contribution pattern is what I'm paying to create the music, what I'm paying whenever I can to make worship nights where I say, you know what, don't pay anything, or if you want to pay, whatever you can afford, right? Nobody should say I could not come because I could not afford to do it, right? So that's how I've literally approached the question of, if it costs this much and I don't see the financial gain naturally, why do I keep doing it? Right? One is the testimonies that I hear, which show me the power in the music, or the power of God through the music, and the fact that it's something that changes somebody's life maybe for eternity. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I will not offer to God that which has cost me nothing. This is actually a scripture, from First Samuel. King David, he had been offered a field, to sacrifice for the purpose of creating an altar and sacrificing to God, and he said, I'm going to pay for that field, right? I'm not taking it for free. Yes, I'm king, and yes, you are giving this to me for free, but I will not take it because I will not offer to God that which costs me nothing.
I got a lot really from what you've just said, to say, what if the cost is your contribution,
Yes.
to the greater cause? So
Exactly.
I totally understand.
Exactly.
Now moving on to your own music career, you've mentioned Brian Sibalo being probably your biggest Zimbabwean musical influence.
Yes.
I would like to understand, how did his work shape your worship work, or the worship artist that you became? What did it mean to you to honor his legacy? I know you did a cover of Ndiri Fambi.
Yes.
As well.
So Brian, I think my biggest attraction to Brian Sibalo was, beyond the fact that he was an amazing vocalist, amazing singer. I think my biggest attraction to him had to do with the fact that he was very innovative. So he was a guy that during the time where you had, the traditional gospel music that was there, it was the time where Mechanic Manyowa was big. It was the time where Jordan Chataika, you will not know this guy. Jordan Chataika also was big during those days. I think the family singers, the Charambas were not on the scene yet, but, it was more the traditional Zimbabwean gospel music that was there. Brian came with a different approach. I think, his style was actually more contemporary than what we were hearing. So I loved the fact that he seemed to always push the envelope, and create gospel music that was not the same as what we were hearing at the time. So I really loved that about him. So I think that was probably the biggest attraction that I had to Brian, that he decided not to conform to what was there at the time, but create something that was innovative, create something that was fresh, create something that was different. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is, doing the cover for Ndiri Fambi. So Ndiri Fambi is I think it's probably my favorite Brian Sibalo song. And I'd always wanted to do that song. I never, so disclaimer, I really don't do covers, and so Ndiri Fambi was one that I'd always say to myself, I'd love to do that song. So the bonus for me with Ndiri Fambi is I actually did it with Brian Sibalo's younger brother, Daniel.
Wow.
So that was a big, it was a big, honor for me to do that. And so I have Daniel on the song. He sounds mostly like Brian, so it was just interesting for us to be able to pull that off, and so we came up with our own version of the song. I wrote some additional lyrics to it, and we're actually working on our second Brian Sibalo cover, me and Daniel. But again, it was a big honor for me to be able to do that, to honor Brian's legacy by doing a song that has spoken to my life in a big way. And also being able to do it with his brother was a big bonus.
Amazing. So you mentioned something that's quite profound there in terms of his creativity, his innovation, bringing something fresh and new. That just makes me curious. Please take me through your own kind of creative process. Where do we start and where do we end?
So the creative process for me always starts with inspiration, and so I say this to my, songwriting mentees and people that I mentor, to say that songwriting itself, that process of songwriting, I want to say is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. And I mean, of course, these are not hard numbers, but these are numbers that are relative, that kind of give you an idea of, you get inspiration, like everybody, creatives, they'll get inspiration from different sources. So for me, most of my inspiration comes during my own worship times, my own personal worship times. I could be reading the Bible, I could be praying, I could just be worshiping on, in my studio on the keyboard, and then God drops, a lyric, a melody, and then I latch onto it. And what I usually do is whenever I get inspiration, I'll take my phone out and record an audio note, so that I don't forget it, because I actually do forget, right? So I'll record those ideas in my phone as and when they come. I'm always taking my phone out, recording those voice notes, and then later on I go back and I start revisiting these ideas. So the 10%, so for me, that's not 10%, right? So the inspiration comes in a moment, I put it down, and then the process of writing the song now, that's where the 90% perspiration comes in. What that simply means for me is, now I am putting to work the skill of songwriting. I'm putting to work vocabulary. I'm putting to work rhymes. I'm putting to work all these different styles. I listen to a lot of music. I expose myself to a lot of songs, and then I pick things that make sense. So all that experience comes, I channel that into creating the song. So I'm just talking lyric and melody, right? Melody is the tune. How does the song sound? So the melody usually comes by inspiration. The lyric, now I start writing it. And then once that song is done, or once I feel that the song is done, I have a home studio, so I'll usually record the idea down, keys, piano, and then I listen to it several times, make sure that I'm happy with the lyric. And then once I'm happy with that stage to say the lyric is done, the melody is done, it's just maybe a piano track and a vocal track, then I take it to my producer. I've got a few producers that know my sound, know my heart, know what I sound like, and know how I want to sound like. So I'll usually give them that idea, which is just maybe a piano and a vocal, and say, hey man, here's the song and here's what I'm thinking. This song actually sounds like, and then if there's an example of a song that I feel like, in terms of the sounds that we use, in terms of, the energy, I'll probably say it sounds like Pardon's song, da 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 da, so that it gives them a frame of reference, right? And now the producer's work, if I'm not co-producing with him, the producer's work now is to listen to that idea that I've given them in terms of the vocal and in terms of the melody. And then their job now is to say, okay, now that this is the verse, this is the chorus, if there's a bridge, this is the bridge. How do we arrange these things to dance with each other, right? So the arrangement comes in. And then they're also thinking, what kind of sounds do we need? Do we need a piano on this song? Do we need an acoustic guitar? Do we need, live instrumentation? Or we can program all the things on the keyboard? So all these are decisions now that the producer, if he's good, and if he already knows me that well, they probably have an idea of what I need, what I want. And then the producer puts that idea in place. And then now we start this process of going back and forth with what the producer is coming up with. If I like it, then we go ahead and really start building the song. We'll probably bring in, somebody to play guitars. We'll probably bring in somebody to play bass. If the song needs like live drums, we've got drummers, like session drummers that we know that are really good, that will engage, So it's a whole, it's a not complex, but it's a very detailed process that starts with the inspiration, which for me usually comes during my own personal worship times, or it can even come through observation of what's going on, right? I could be looking at what's going on in my space, in my world, and maybe I want to say something about it. All that is part of inspiration. Once the inspiration is put down on paper or recorded, then I take it to my producer, and then we start working on arrangement. We start working on figuring out what we want it to sound like. Once we're happy with that, then we bring musicians together, and then the musicians will play, each will play their own part. And then once we are done, we do a whole bunch of listening again, back and forth. I've got songs that I have recorded but never released. Because after we're done, I'm listening. I'm like, I don't know that this is exactly how this needs to have gone. My point being, that process of listening sometimes leads me to decide to the decision of not even releasing a song, even though it's been recorded and maybe ready to go. But if I'm not happy with something, I'll not release it. So that's my creative process. I don't know if that, does that answer your question?
That really answers the question, and it's quite complex, and it sounds like a very, intense and sophisticated process.
Yeah.
But what I picked from what you've said is you mentioned a few bits about technology, using your phone to do maybe a voice note, then the back and forth with your producer and whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm then thinking you come from a technology background, right? And now AI is fundamentally kind of reshaping the music industry.
Yes.
And you are somebody who sits right at the intersection of it all in terms of tech and worship. What's your honest take on AI? And is it a threat or something else entirely, particularly from a worship perspective?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Very good question. So that whole process. So for me, okay, the first thing I'll say is AI is an opportunity. And it's a tool that, if used properly, can enhance the process. That whole process that I just described, where now I get with my producer and we go back and forth trying to figure out, how the song should sound like. Now with AI, what I've started doing, and I'll do this with my producer sometimes, sometimes I do it on my own. That little demo that I said, I give my producer my vocal with the piano on it for the whole song so that he can see how the song goes. What I've started doing now is I actually feed that demo, which is my voice and the piano, into AI, which is Suno. So there's an app called Suno that I use, Suno that I use. So I'll feed that demo into Suno and then tell it, hey, I want a choir. I want to hear this as a male vocal. I want guitars that sound like A, B, C, D. I need an acoustic guitar here. On the chorus, I want you to put this. I want you to put strings on the intro. So I'll literally tell it what I'm thinking. And then now Suno, within maybe 2 minutes, spits out a demo based on the prompt that I've given it, and also based on the lyric that I've given it and the melodic structure of the song. Now, I listen to that. If I don't like it, I tell it to redo. Actually, I think it does it always does two options, A and B. If I don't like either of them, I'll tell it to redo it. So basically what I'm saying is that process that usually would take maybe a few days or even weeks, with my producer going back and forth trying to settle on how this song should sound like, I can actually do it now in a few minutes. And then once I settle on what I think is the right texture, right tone, right everything for the demo, for the song, I give that now to my producer and say, hey man, this is how the song needs to sound like. Let's get guys that can make this happen. And then we bring the musicians together. So for me, that's the part where AI is an amazing tool because it expedites the process. From a worship perspective, one thing that I think may end up being a disadvantage if we are not careful, or if I'm not careful based on the way that I create music, the process of lyric writing for me is very delicate. And also it's one of those where I'm writing and then I'm praying and then I'm looking through the scriptures to make sure that what I'm saying is theologically sound, because I realize that for some people, my song may be the only theology that they're exposed to. So I'm trying to make it pass through all these filters to say, is this theologically correct? Is this edifying? Is this whatever? All those things. That's me, right? So I'm writing, I'm praying about it, I'm making mistakes, and then I'm coming back, so that whole creative process for me, that's what excites me. The moment, and I've never done this and I'll never do it actually, to say to AI, hey, can you write me a song about ABCD? I'll never do. Why? Because then it takes away from the gift that I really think God has given me, one, but also I think it takes away the opportunity for me to really seek God in terms of what he wants me to say to his people. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So for me, that's the danger for somebody like me. I don't know how other people create. I don't know how other people write, but for me specifically, that's one area that I'll never get into. I'll still write my lyrics. I'll still pray about my lyrics. I'll still allow myself to make mistakes and come back and fix them. I'll still collaborate with other people to write together, because I really believe that when you write together, somebody brings something totally different from what you're thinking or from what you're capable of. So that process, pardon, is very beautiful. And I really believe that when God breathes into that process, you come up with something that can change the lives of people. So back to your question. How does this impact the worship, our worship, maybe worship music? I think it impacts our worship music positively if we use it in the way that I say it, to expedite the process of coming up with how does the sound like, how does it sound like? What kind of guitars can I put in here? How do the backing vocals sound like? I think it can expedite that process and help us with arrangements. I think it can become a problem if now you are using AI to write worship lyrics. That's just me, and then again, it's just my opinion. Everybody has got their own opinion and they're totally entitled to it. And I don't know that there's any right or wrong, because I'm not really an authority, when it comes to this. I'm just talking about myself. I'll not make AI write lyrics for me. Why? Because the lyric that I'm writing for me is worship to God. The lyric that I'm writing for me is really, the way that I'm worshiping is the offering that I'm presenting to God, and it needs to be something that's coming from the heart. I don't think AI can communicate what this thing here called the heart feels, and I don't think AI, the Bible says that deep calls unto deep, and the spirit is what appeals to God, because God is spirit, right? It says in John 4:24, God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So I really think that there's a place for us to use AI in terms of the creation process, but there's also a place that is 100% reserved for God.
There is a debate actually going on in Zimbabwe, about sort of AI generated songs, making waves and making a lot of noise. Yeah. So I guess I can tell in terms of which side of the coin you are on, isn't it? In terms of the authenticity from a lyrical perspective, a spiritual perspective, and even the melody itself.
And maybe one other thing I'll add, pardon, is, I quoted that scripture that says, when David was saying, I will not offer to God that which has not cost me anything. I actually also even want to apply it to this whole AI space. If I've asked AI to write the song for me, and if I've asked AI to sing the song for me, then what has it cost me in terms of my heart, in terms of my effort, in terms of my sacrifice, in terms of my just seeking God to say, Lord, what do you want for your people? Because that's what I want to write down. This is AI writing for you. So what exactly has that cost you, right? And again, as a tool, absolutely. I think if you get in the camp that says, I don't even know that you can say as a music producer or as a creative, you can say I'm 100% analog. I don't use AI. I don't even think that's true. Why? Because a lot of the music creating software that we have right now, most of the software that we use for mixing runs AI left, right, and center. When you're mixing, when you're fixing things, AI is actually doing a whole lot of that. So I don't even know that you can honestly say, I'm anti-AI, I don't use AI. That statement is not true anymore. I don't think it is. Some people may not know that AI is involved in what they are doing. Some people may not know, honestly may not know, but I can tell you that maybe 99% of how we are creating music somehow has got AI involved to handle the large amounts of data that is involved. AI is involved. Machine learning is involved. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it goes back to the understanding of, do we know what AI is? Do we know what we are calling AI in this case? Anyway, I will leave that to the musicians and the aspiring musicians to define and set the boundaries. So you are based in Texas.
Yeah.
Your music is deeply rooted in Zimbabwe in terms of the lyrics, the vibe, the sound. How do you hold on to that identity you kind of still impact back home in Zimbabwe?
That one goes back to the whole identity thing, to say I am who I am, Zimbabwean at heart through and through. I was gonna say, when I'm writing, I think in Shona, but I don't know that that's true. Actually, I don't know. But being Zimbabwean, having grown up in Zimbabwe, having been exposed to the Zimbabwean, culture and music, I don't think that's something that can just go away unless you make a deliberate effort to make it disappear. I don't even know that you can take it out. So that's why you will see that come through in a lot of the music that I do. But I also want to say that being in Texas, being in the States, and having led worship here for several years, and also writing music for the churches that I've been a part of, or for the churches where I've led worship, has also caused me to develop, a different sound, so to speak, because I was leading worship in churches that are multicultural, multiracial, but mostly Caucasian, American. So it caused me to also start listening to music that applies to the environment that I'm in. So in as much as I have a lot of Zimbabwean-based music, I probably have more music now that is also geared towards the church here in the States, or maybe the global church, right? So you will see that a lot of the stuff that I do is also either very, maybe in English, or maybe a combination of English and Shona. But I think now I probably have more on the English side in terms of language, right? And on the contemporary Christian music in terms of style, just because of the churches that I've been called to minister to whilst I've been outside of Zimbabwe.
I really understand in terms of the cultural shift and the dynamics. But anyway, I like the way that you mentioned the global church, which means you want to go global in terms of your reach, as far as music is concerned. Now, in 2014, you collaborated with Janet Manyowa on a song called Amazing God, which I would say helped launch her also international stardom. And I know this song topped the charts in terms of Star FM's gospel grades, and it dominated the charts for quite some time. My question is less about the song, but more about how does it feel on your end, when your music becomes a platform for somebody else's breakthrough?
So good question again. I believe in this thing that, my fruit grows on other people's trees. So that expression really explains how I feel and who I feel I am, especially in my later years now as I've grown older. That by investing in somebody else, you may not hear the stories, by the way, and someone may not even come back to say thank you, and that's fair. But when you see people doing well, and that God used you in a small part, to help them start, or to help them get where you are, I think that in itself is satisfying. So the Janet story, that people may not know, I think she actually mentioned it, or it's featured on a documentary that Econet did for them. So they featured me there, and I talk about how we met. That this is on Janet's short documentary that Econet Zimbabwe did for her. But the Janet story that people may not know is, so prior to meeting Janet, I'd been in Zimbabwe with Zimpraise. So Zimpraise had invited me as a guest artist on one of their concerts. So after that concert, I got an email. I don't remember whether it was an email or a phone call from Manyowa, which is Janet's husband. I didn't know who these guys were. I had no idea who Munya was, who Janet was. So Munya says, "Hey, Dr. Manyame, my name is Munya." He introduces himself. "My name is Munyaradzi Manyowa. My wife is a worship, is a worship leader. We love your music, and I was wondering if you could mentor my wife, through the process. She really wants to record something, and are you available to mentor her through that process?" And again, a week before that, right? A week before the Zimpraise thing, I had really started feeling in my heart and in my spirit, God challenging me to start mentoring people. So this is like a week before, I really feel God saying, hey, you need to start mentoring. And then I go for this Impress thing. And then a week after this Impress thing, Manyowa calls me asking for mentorship for his wife. So immediately, again, like I said, I didn't know who Janet was, but my answer to him was absolutely, get us in touch, connect me with her, and then we'll start the process. So Janet got in touch at that time, just to show you how old that was. We used Skype. Do you remember Skype?
Yes, I do.
So we used Skype. We were doing Skype sessions, video sessions, mentoring one-on-one with Janet. And then, so she says, Doc, I've got this song that I've written. It's called Amazing God. Would you write a verse to the song, and would you please sing with me? That's actually how the whole thing started. So she gives me this song, I listen to the song, and I'm like, this is beautiful. So we start co-writing. I wrote a second verse to the song, and then we recorded it. So I introduced her to my producer at that time, who was Tremia Musipa. So Tremia produced the song. And again, as a worship song at that time, we didn't really know how it was going to do, because I think people were more into, upbeat praise songs. So we had no idea how the song was going to do. And before we knew it, the song became big on Gospel Greats. Song became big on Gospel Greats. And then I came to Zimbabwe a year later, and I had a worship night. And that worship night, I would like to believe that was Janet's first, public concert, basically. So I had her come. We sang Amazing God together. She was doing backing vocals for me, but we did this together with Janet, and Pastor G was there. I think my other friend, Pastor Prince Mafukidze, was there as well. Another mentee of mine, Dorothy Chipo, was there. So it was like a Sound of Worship, which is the academy that I run. So it was a Sound of Worship concert or worship night, where this was Janet's first concert, basically, as part of Sound of Worship. And then, of course, from there, we all know where Janet is now. I cannot even take credit for where she is and how she has grown by leaps and bounds, but it makes me proud. I know it's a long answer again, but how does it make me feel when I see that people that God has allowed me to be a part of their journey, when I see them doing well, oh man, it blesses me. And then it goes back. You remember your question about when you don't see the money, when you don't see naturally what you think is the fruit of the sacrifice. When I see people like Janet and other mentees that have come through Sound of Worship and my influence, when I see them do amazing things, then it makes me realize that I must not stop. Why? Because the fruit grows on other people's trees, right? And this fruit really is for the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Long answer, pardon. You're causing me to give you these long answers.
No, but the longer the better in terms of the detail and the context. This is a powerful story, and I'm sure you must be proud, of your mentorship as well and your support.
Absolutely.
Obviously, in terms of seeing how some of your mentees have went on to become, great artists. So that's really powerful. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to just listen and you taking me through really these journeys. It's a good inside information.
This is inside intel, son, that I never. So the funny thing also is, I don't think I've ever really shared this story. This is the first time I'm telling this story in this detail. Mm-hmm. If you go to Janet's documentary, you will hear part of it. I'll say, hey, Munya wanted me to mentor his wife. You hear that part. But I've never really given the backstory, as in a few weeks before that, I really felt God saying, this is what I want you to do. And then a few weeks after that, I get my first mentee, basically.
Then, from being nominated as the best new artist at the Africa Gospel Music Awards early in your career, to the Zimbabwe Achievers Awards for Best International Artist, the Pemmican Gospel Award for Best Zim Diaspora Artist, and songs like Munamato, which was number 1 for more than 7 weeks, and Amazing God, which we've just spoken about, which also hit number 1 on the gospel charts. I'm sure it's quite clear even to somebody listening that your music has been recognized across continents. But take us through that journey of the recognition, and what have those moments meant to you, and which one hit the hardest emotionally for you?
That's a tough one. I think whenever recognition comes, even if you're not seeking it, right? Whenever recognition comes, there's a blessing that comes with that. So you feel honored, you feel appreciated, you feel like the work is paying off. So there's always a blessing and a satisfaction that comes from that. I think in terms of which recognition had the most or invoked the most emotion, that's hard to tell. Pardon. I think the Africa Gospel Music Awards for me was probably the one that invoked a lot of emotion. Why? Because I think it was my first. I think it was my first nomination. One, but also two. This is not a Zimbabwean-based award thing. It was actually something based in London, where they had been playing one of my songs on Premier Gospel, which is a radio station, a radio program in the UK, like national radio, FM radio, not online. So for me, I think that meant just because it was the first, and also because it was not by Zimbabwean peers, where you can say, "All right, it's my friends, who are trying to push me." This was being done by people that absolutely had no relation, with me prior to the awards, basically. So I think it probably meant more, although all of them meant a lot for their own reasons, basically.
A simple question: were you surprised by any of them?
I think I was surprised by the Pemmican Award. And why I say that is, one, at that time, I don't know now, but at that time it was probably the biggest, gospel music awards in Zimbabwe, done by, Prophet Makandiwa and his wife and their church, right? So it was probably the biggest awards, gospel music awards ceremony in the country. And the nominees that were there also for the Zim diaspora, for the diaspora musicians, were brilliant. There were brilliant songs there. To be honest, I did not even think that being nominated was big, but I wasn't even expecting to win it. So I was surprised by it.
Amazing. Yeah, I remember the Pemmican. I think they were quite huge.
They were quite huge. Yeah.
Yeah, they were quite a huge event. Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for that. Let's talk briefly about your Sound of Worship Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you run this, right? And it's a training platform for worship artists, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Primarily from Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to understand now is what gap were you trying to fill that you think formal music education was not meeting?
Yeah. So I think the gap that I was trying to fill is one that I felt my generation was affected by. So during our time, I feel like we did not have mentors. I really feel like we didn't have a lot of guys that were prepared to be selfless enough. I don't want to sound harsh, but I feel like we didn't have the older guys that had made it, that were prepared to take the younger, upcoming guys and say, "Hey, this is the way, walk in it. Avoid A, B, C, D. But not only that, I'm going to open this door for you so that you don't have to bang on it and try to kick it open. I've had access to this opportunity and that opportunity and that opportunity. I'm going to walk with you and introduce you and leave you in these rooms that without me, you would not be able to walk into." So I really feel like we grew up, in a time or at a time where we did not have a lot of those. So Sound of Worship for me was apart from the fact that I really felt God calling me to do it, to mentor and train and help. Sound of Worship for me was a response to what I did not have as a young, musician or as a young worship artist, growing through the ranks. I really felt like for the most part, you had to open your own doors. You had to find your own doors, bang on them, open them, make mistakes and sometimes fail without even recovery. And I was hoping that with Sound of Worship Academy, I create a platform where the younger people that are coming up who may, I want to call them nameless, faceless, creatives that nobody knows, nobody has heard about. Can there be a platform where if I have a little bit of influence, I don't have that much influence in Zimbabwe, but if I have a little bit of influence, can they ride on that influence to say, "Hey, I've done a song with Dr. Comfort, and maybe because of that, maybe there's a door that opens on radio, maybe there's a door that opens in churches, maybe there's a door that opens with my own friends who are accomplished musicians, to say, "Hey, I heard your song with Doc. Do you want to feature on my album?" Or do you want to, things like that, which I feel we didn't have. And that pattern, I don't think you get it through formal training, really. It's part of the networking. It's part of the coaching. It's part of the having advocates who are going to speak for you in rooms where you do not have access. So that's really what I hope Sound of Worship Academy, to be. And I think in a way, or in a small way, we've managed to do that for a small number of artists that are coming up.
I understand the mentorship and the coaching bits that you're providing. That's not necessarily taught in your traditional music schools.
Yeah.
Then with the rise of AI, have you had to change or adjust the approach to which you are kind of mentoring or teaching your students that are coming through this academy?
Not yet. But I think naturally things will have to change, right? Because AI is moving at a very fast pace, and I haven't thought yet of how it may impact or affect the way that I mentor or the way that I train. Because the thing with mentorship too is mentorship is simply providing a part of your life to somebody else, right? Opening up your life and giving somebody your time to say, hey, I want to walk with you, right? Use me as a platform, or use me as a sounding board, or use me as an opportunity to avoid making some costly mistakes, basically. I don't know that AI can do that. I think there's still going to be a very big part of what we do that still requires that. AI, by the way, will not pray for you. That's one of the things that I do for my mentees, right? I pray for these kids and they know it. I pray for them. And a lot of times when we are on calls, it always ends up with me just praying and speaking a blessing into their lives and wanting to know how they are doing, wanting to know how their families are doing. AI will never be able to do that.
You touch on the limitations of AI there in terms of that human to human interface, and that understanding between two people is different from an understanding between a machine and a person on the other end. So no, that makes a lot of sense. So let's move on past. But I think we're still in your music as a career as well. But I want to look at it from a bigger picture perspective. On a typical week, you are a husband, you are a father, you are a professional, you are a mentor in your academy, and you're also a recording artist. Please, how do you manage this? Take us through how does this work?
That kind of question you should never ask me, pardon, because it will expose the fact that I'm failing miserably at it. No, so what I'll say is, I think when you look at all those things, I am the same person in all of those functions. What I mean by that is, for my day job, it takes a lot of creativity. So what I do, of course, I research, I write. So think about it. I read a lot and I write a lot about the industry, about what my company does, about what the industry is doing. And I speak a lot at conferences. Does that not sound like a musician? I write a lot, lyrics. I sing a lot, right? I speak a lot. And then I do a lot of presentations, which again, so that's me right there, right? That's me. That's the gift that God has given. I write, I read, I speak. I apply that at work. I apply that in my music and just worship ministry. When it comes to being a father, again, it's the same thing, right? It's the same. I'm still the same person. I think in my household, I think my family, of course, is also a family of creatives, so the kids are doing their own thing creatively, and so I think from that perspective, they understand the demands, but also they enjoy it because they are also creating in their own spaces. So that has made it easy for me to try and strike that balance. Why? Because for the most part, God has allowed who I am to be exactly the same in the functions that I hold, either at home, at church, at work, or in my own studio, in the academy, basically. I'm still the same person.
Wow. Okay. That sounds like you still maintain the use of your skill set consistently across different heads, isn't it?
Exactly. And if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you that I also creatively get out of trouble whenever I mess up. I have a very creative way of...
Amazing. No, that's quite interesting. But you mentioned something that got me thinking. You spoke about you being somebody who reads a lot. And in this day and age of social media, doom scrolling, watching, short clips, etc., what is the importance of reading? Please, can you educate us?
So if you don't read, it's a different age pattern. Actually, I don't even want to generalize this because now people also don't read, but they listen to audiobooks, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't read, I don't know that you will know a lot of things. And if you don't know a lot of things, I don't think that you can thrive. So I'll give you an example. As a musician or as a songwriter, if you don't read, then you cannot build your vocabulary. Then if you cannot build your vocabulary, then your songs are going to be very limited. If your songs are very limited, then your music will not be able to survive. Your songs will not be able to outlive you. Right? Then they may have to depend on production and interesting sounds, but the lyric itself doesn't have impact, So it's so important as a singer, as a songwriter, it's so important that I read as much as I can. For my job, for example, I don't even know that I can survive without reading because I'm constantly trying to push the envelope. I'm constantly trying to challenge my leadership. I'm constantly trying to challenge beyond my own company, the industry to say, hey, can we do better in A, B, C, D? But I would not know that I could even ask that question if I'm not exposing myself to what's out there, So again, things are changing now. You bring up the whole, the AI, you bring up, social media, scrolling and all that. It affects how we read for sure. But whatever way we read or whatever way we consume information, we have to be consuming information, for education purposes.
Thank you for that. Quite useful. So I know we digressed a bit because I was very much interested in your advice and your opinion on reading. Mm-hmm. But we were talking about you being a man of many hats.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming there is a lot of work-life balance at play, isn't it? When you try to juggle, these different balls or these different heads. But when something has to give, and it always does, what is it that gets squeezed first, and how do you feel about that?
That's tough. That's really tough because I feel like for me, it's not so something has to give for sure, but it's not the same thing that gives all the time. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely. So part of that work-life balance is actually, I don't know that there's one thing that I say, hey man, when push comes to shove, this is the thing that suffers. I don't know. Why? Because the creativity part of me is always creating, literally, I'm having songs pretty much all the time, even when I'm sleeping. So that never stops. Right? So that never stops. But it's just a matter of now carving out time to say, okay, I've got inspiration here. How do I now, transform that from inspiration to a final product, right? The family thing, this is always happening. When I'm not at work, I'm home. One way or the other. Now, I think what makes it easy is the fact that, like during school time, when I'm home, Levi, who's the youngest, and he's the one at home mostly, he's got his own schoolwork, that he's doing. Either it's homework or he's working on some music for school. Julia is in college. She's also doing her own thing. Nyasha, when she comes back from work, usually she brings work home. So she's also doing her own thing. So that helps to take care of my work-life balance because then I can also get to do my own thing because nobody is paying attention to what I'm doing. I know I told you that I can creatively get out of these questions, but this is an example of that. Everybody is pretty occupied, so much that it's hard. It's hard to make the sacrifice, right? Of course, there are times where we designate as this is family time, either it's a Bible study or prayer or whatever the case may be, or maybe we're going out. That's different. But on a typical day, if you come to my house, chances are people are doing their own, people are occupied with their own business, either school for the kids, work for Nyasha, and me either way. I usually try not to bring work home, so when I'm home, mostly it's just going to be music, photography, videography, all the creative stuff that I do, So I have space for that because nobody's chasing me for my attention most of the times. And I hope they will not watch this podcast because it may, yeah. This is between you and me, man, and whoever else is watching online.
There's some cheeky advice there from you to say, if you want to have work-life balance, just keep everybody occupied.
Yes. Actually, that's exactly. Make sure everybody's busy.
Yes. No, that's leadership actually in another in another way. But anyway, no, that's okay. But then in terms of having so many things to do, then from music to work, etc., have you then have to deliberately set any boundaries to try and separate this? Because your music, especially being music ministry in the worship sense of things, it might not have, start to finish times. It's like 24/7. One of your mentees can reach out to you anytime, or anybody needs a prayer, or how do you kind of set any boundaries then to try and strike some balance?
So what I've deliberately done, and I have not, because of the nature of how my family life goes, I've not had to make these hard calls a lot. But what I've deliberately done is family time is, that comes first. If there's something that we're doing with the family, if there's something that needs all of us to engage, everything else is secondary. So, in as much as I've said, I try to keep everybody occupied, I think what comes primary is the family time, because that's really what's important. Everything else flows or follows after that, So I think family time is going to be prime 100% of the time. It's only that, like I said, I think because of the engagements that everybody has, a lot of the times also everybody's happy doing what they are doing.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm following. Yeah. So then overall, as we reflect really on your music career, what has been the hardest decision that you have had to make in your music journey? Is there any moment where you had to choose between a safe path and a meaningful one?
Yeah. So I think the hardest thing, and I'll answer it in a contradiction. The hardest thing for me, seriously, it has been the fact that a lot of times it feels like I keep pouring in, right, financially for the music, and not I don't stop. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter whether there is revenue that comes from it or not. I keep pouring. So that's the harder choice. But again, that's my contribution, right? The contradiction is, because God has blessed me with a job that allows me to create music without the pressure of thinking about the market. I've had the opportunity to create music that I really feel and believe in 100% that this is exactly what God wants me to do. Does it make sense?
Yes.
I've been blessed that I can still pay bills, somehow, apart from the music. And that has freed me from the pressure of wanting to do things that are trending. So what's on the market right now? What kind of music are people listening to? What's giving people money? And then do that. I thank God that I've been privileged to not do that. Whatever you hear me create is exactly what I feel like this is what I should create, both in terms of lyrics and in terms of style, right? If I really feel that this is what God wants for the church, maybe I write a song that is for corporate worship, and I have it produced in a way that I feel can speak to the church. If I really feel that this is really not for church, but this is something social, this is something maybe that somebody needs to hear, that may not even be a Christian, but they can still identify with it, I can do it without thinking about what the market will think. Oh, I've actually done a song for my wife, I've actually done a song for my wife without even thinking twice about, people will say, Dr. Manyame now is doing love songs. I don't care. I don't even, because this is for my wife that I love. So because I don't have the pressure of thinking about what do people think. If they don't like it, they will not buy the music, and then I'll become, poor, or I'll become a certain kind. I don't have that pressure. It's a blessing, and I recognize that not many people who do what I do in terms of music have that blessing to where they're not thinking about the market, they're not thinking about trends, they're not even thinking about what stuff is sounding like, so have the need to produce something that sounds similar to what somebody else is doing. What you hear from Comfort Manyame is exactly what I feel God wants me to put out there, in terms of message and in terms of sound.
That's powerful, I would say, because there is a bit of authenticity, really, to say this is what's coming from me and this is what I want to bring across. I'm not being driven by any industry forces or any pressures to try and conform or suit in any space. So that's really powerful. That's really powerful. But to reflect then, what does success look like for you at this stage of your career from a music perspective? And has that definition kind of shifted from when you started doing the music to date?
So I think it has shifted in the sense that, as a young musician, whenever you're doing music, I think you measure success by how many people know your songs, right? How many songs are being played on radio? How many songs are getting to number one? How many songs are getting into the charts? That's always a focus for many musicians that are starting up. I would say if there are, it's a very small percentage of musicians that are not driven by that, especially when they're starting, right? But I think as I've grown older, my main, and this is what I say to Sound of Worship mentees is always, success is not the number of likes, is not the number of fans, is not the number of charts that you break. Success is faithfully executing what God has called you and equipped you to do for the building of his kingdom. When you know that you have done exactly what God has called you to do and you have done it faithfully, that is success. So that's one of the answers that I give. But on a practical level for me, success as a mentor, really, not even as a musician, but as a mentor, success is when I see fruit that is growing on other people's trees that God has given me the privilege to either water or even plant the seed, or whatever the case may be. Maybe I'm the guy that has come with a hoe to remove the weeds, whatever contribution I've made to somebody's journey. When I see them producing fruit, for me, that's success. And then from a songwriter's, like a Christian worship songwriter's perspective, there's this one thing that whenever I see a church singing my song or singing a song that I've written, it gives me, naturally, that brings a lot of satisfaction and just feeling like, wow, thank you, Lord, that I got to be a part of creating a song that other churches or other people are actually singing for praise and worship on a Sunday or a Wednesday. So I've kind of talked about three things. One, when I feel like I'm executing faithfully, using the gifts that God has given me and executing on the calling that he has called me with, that's success. Whenever I feel like I see fruit growing on other people's trees that I've heard a part in that tree growing, that's success for me. And then lastly, whenever I see this, very practical for me, and I think it's a songwriter thing, whenever I see other people, it could be churches or it could be other artists as well, when I see other artists taking my song and recording it as they are on, for me, that's success as well, because then it shows that there's impact in the gift, there's impact in the calling,
Wow. I think I need to rethink my definition of success, because this is been a very philosophical definition, but I can relate in terms of, the key point is to say that what is success as in simple terms. No, thank you for that.
You're
Then
welcome.
you have built something genuinely unusual, right? From a doctorate, a tech career, an international music ministry, an academy. Then looking back, what is the thread that connects all of this?
The thread that connects all of that, is God, right? Everything that's the thread. For me, that's the thread, right? God being the one that has given the ability, one, God being the one that has given the desire to do it, and God being the one that has allowed me to see fruit in all these things that God has called me to do. So that's the thread. You cannot take God away from it, then it all falls flat. You know, whether it's the music, whether it's the career, job wise, whether it's the Sound of Worship Academy and mentoring other people, whatever it is, remove God from that picture. It's absolutely nothing. It falls flat on its face.
The other question that I have, so there's somebody back in Zimbabwe who is talented or who believes they are talented, because I know many people sometimes you think you're talented, but the audience or the listeners can say otherwise. But my question on a serious note is, somebody back in Zimbabwe, they are passionate about music and they think they are talented, and they want to pursue this as a career. What advice would you give them?
What advice that I would give is start. Start somewhere, because I think a lot of people, they think about it, they meditate on it, but they never start. And I say this also even to my songwriting classes, to say, if God has called you to be a songwriter, or if you feel like you're a songwriter, write something, write something, let it have its natural cycle, and then you will see if you're a writer or not. So it's exactly the same thing. For those people that feel that they want to take music as a career, one, start somewhere. Two, seek mentors, and again, I know it's easier said than done, because it may be harder maybe to find somebody that's willing to mentor you, or somebody that's willing to coach you, or somebody that's willing to say, hey, take my hand, let's walk together. Because I think, especially if you're just starting, those doors may be hard to open, and you may not even know the doors that exist when you're just starting. So just getting exposed to others that are already doing it, and being humble enough to seek help, right? To seek help, but not just seek help, but humble enough to want to learn, humble enough to want to grow, humble enough to have somebody tell you, no, you're doing it wrong, do it this way. That humility will go a big, a long way, basically. Humility will go a long way. So one, start, be tenacious. Two, be humble. Humble about where you are. Part of it also is humility to know exactly how gifted or not gifted you are. That takes humility. To say, what, man, I really thought that I sounded like Zama, but I've just realized that actually I don't. So that humility to be able to properly assess where you are in terms of gift, in terms of talent, because that will help you to realize the gaps that are there and to seek help to fill those gaps. So be tenacious. Be humble, seek out help, seek out mentors. And then three, one thing I would also say is there are a lot of people who want to sing. And I say this to my mentees a lot, to say, yes, it's great to have a good voice. It's great to sing a great song. But I really believe that the secret is in being able to write great songs. And the good thing about writing is it's something that you can actually learn to do. Some people are born naturally wordsmith, they can play with words beautifully. But for some people, you actually just have to learn. And the more you learn, the more you practice, the more you exercise, it's like a muscle. The more you do it, the better you become. So I actually would like to say, learn how to write. Learn how to write, right? And then if you've tried it and you realize, what, man, I cannot put words together, then seek out somebody who can write for you. Because one of the things that we've seen in the Zimbabwean culture is somebody wants to be the writer, they want to be the singer, and it's very rare that you have somebody who can do both things well, but because I want to be the songwriter, I also want to be the singer. Oh, and by the way, I also want to be the producer. Be able to recognize your strength and then run with your strength, and then find others that are gifted in the areas where you have inadequacy, so that they can help you fill those gaps, and then you can produce a complete package. I know it's a whole lot. Be tenacious, don't give up. Two, be humble in the way you approach your gift, in the way you seek out help. And then three, also learn where your strength is, capitalize on that. Where you have a weakness, if you cannot write, seek out people that can write. If you cannot sing, maybe God has called you to be a songwriter and not necessarily a singer. So be able to kind of recognize that and then capitalize on your strength. It's so much easier to capitalize on your strength than try to build something that you were not built for.
Incredible. Is it fair to then take this kind of as a takeaway to say, be honest with yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And being honest with yourself, pardon, requires a lot of humility, man. It requires a lot of humility. Why? Because naturally, as humans, we always see the best in us.
Yeah.
So I can think, and one thing I told my mentees and people that care to listen to me and maybe are friends with me, I always say that I see myself as a songwriter, not even as a singer. I know that I sing, but if you were to ask me, what is the thing that I feel like even in my sleep, right? And I hope this comes out right. The thing that comes easy, the thing that comes naturally to me is writing. I'll sing here and there, but I would probably hire myself as a songwriter before I hire myself as a singer.
At least you're honest with yourself.
I'm honest with myself. And also that helps me contribute to other people's journey as well. I could not coach you how to sing. I don't want to lie. I cannot be a vocal coach. I cannot coach somebody how to sing. I can help with arrangements to say, hey, I think it needs to sound like this and this and this. I need vocals to sound. But I'm not a vocal coach. But can I help somebody learn how to write a song? Absolutely. So yes, be honest with yourself.
Great. No, thanks, Doc. I think
You're welcome.
one of the other questions that I then have, probably as one of my last questions, is one of my favorite albums is Worship in the Throne Room.
Yeah.
That's, for me, that's my number one. But I just want you to share with us, do you have any upcoming events, any upcoming albums, any updates that you, or where do people get your music as well? Where can one go to?
Thank you for that, pardon. People can get my music on Apple Music, on Spotify, on Google Play, on Amazon Music, on YouTube. So if you just Google my name, Comfort Manyame, chances are what comes up really mostly is the music, not even the academic stuff, not even the work stuff, which is kind of interesting. If you listen to my music, chances you would not even think that I actually work. And then also, if you see me at work and see my work, you would not even know that I do music, So if you Google my name, you'll find a lot of information there. But I'm on Instagram as Manyame, I think. Facebook, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube. You can get my music on Apple Music, on Spotify, on Google Play, anywhere where they sell music digitally, you can find my music. And then in terms of upcoming stuff, I'm wrapping up in an EP, 4 tracks or 5 tracks, where we're actually done recording. It's going to have some interesting collaborations there, which I hope to release in July. So I'll be releasing it in Zimbabwe in July, and then we'll just see what happens after that. And no events. I'll do a worship seminar with a church in Zimbabwe in July, on July 4th. I'm still waiting for details, and then maybe a conference there. And then on the academic side, I'm actually, if you are in Zimbabwe, in Chinhoyi, so Chinhoyi University of Technology have their conference sometime in July. I'm going to be one of the keynote speakers there.
Right. No, thank you, Doc. I think this has been one of the most informative from a very musical perspective. I myself, not being a very musical person.
You're honest with yourself. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.
Exactly. I'm quite honest. I cannot sing to save my life. That's how bad I am. So, no, thank you so much. This is quite informative, and I'm hoping anyone listening or watching has taken a lot of notes, has taken a lot of lessons, especially if you're interested in music as a career. Yeah. I think that there were quite a lot of nuggets and a lot of wisdom really that you shared with us. But overall, just to thank you for your appearance and your support from episode 1 to now this third one. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that this is definitely not the last one.
I want to extend my thanks to you as well, for having me. And these stories that we're telling, these are real stories. And I think stories about our lives will always have an impact, on somebody else's life. And it's not just theory. When we talk about these things, we are living testimonies and living testaments of what we're talking about, So thank you for this opportunity to just share these stories, and hopefully there's 1 or 2 people that got something out of it, right? Son of Worship Academy, it's an online thing, which means we can do it from anywhere. If you need mentoring, let's talk, and then we'll see how best you can get help and things like that. Again, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, you can find me there. Just contact me, and then we'll be in touch. But thanks once again for having me. It's been great being on Meaningful Careers, talking about life.
Meaningful careers now. Take the time to take your destiny in your hands now.